Today, just looking at a small piece of Star Trek lore that's rather interesting and severely not explored, and let me know if you've actually heard about this. There was a war, but maybe not the one you're thinking of, between the Vulcans and the Romulans well prior to their contact with humanity. And it was caused by a Q. In the 2370s, a Q, who was kind of attempting to kill himself, very, very sad, for what he considered to be good reasons to enhance the Q continuum. It was pointed out that something he did while attempting to do this sparked a war between the Vulcans and the Romulans that lasted for many years, and was very violent and very bloody. Now, he'd been in prison for 300 years, so we know this war must have taken place some time before the 2070s, but may have been as far back as perhaps the 20th century, even maybe as far back as when T'Pol's ancestor was aboard a ship that was surveying Earth. It could also explain why the Vulcans were exploring into that region of space. If there was some kind of conflict, they could have been looking at maybe Earth as a staging ground. Just saying, it's a possibility. We don't know exactly what he did that sparked the war, and it does raise a lot of questions. T'Pol mentions that the Vulcan High Command has had no official contact with the Romulans prior to 2152. But we know that isn't true. It's just that T'Pol doesn't know that it isn't true. We know that there are Vulcans and Romulans who are colluding together for early attempts at reunification, just a reunification that probably wouldn't go so well for the Vulcans overall at this time. And T'Pol is completely unaware of that, but we do know that was happening, with First Minister V'Las conspiring with Romulan agents on Vulcan. Now, these were disrupted by events around that time period and the collapse of the old Vulcan High Command, but it's interesting to think that somehow an entire war got covered up. T'Pol simply didn't know anything about it, or it was perhaps somehow rewritten as a war with the Andorians or some other power, or perhaps was fought with proxy power to begin with. It's conceivable that some Q snapped its fingers and made the war undone. That's also a possibility, but that was never stated. So we've got contradictory positions. There is an outside chance, considering the Q are timeless, that the actual conflict that they're discussing was the one known as the Time of Awakening, which was about 2,000 years ago, which was the actual time the Romulans and the Vulcans split from one another, and those who marched beneath the Raptor's wing marched down into deep space and left Vulcan forever. And it's possible that Quinn did something on Vulcan at that time that caused that schism and maybe prevented those early Vulcans, those Romulan and De Bruin ancestors, from actually taking on the teachings and embracing logic. It's plausible, although again, not entirely clear. Like I said, there's not much to this. I just find it a really interesting tidbit of lore that there was an entire war that would seem to indicate that the Vulcans had much better knowledge of the Romulans than they would pretend to, and bear in mind, humans wouldn't learn what a Romulan looks like until the 23rd century, because during the Earth Romulan War they didn't show themselves. It's plausible the Romulans did the same thing during this war. Perhaps what ended it was the Vulcans learning that the Romulans were Vulcan, or at least were very, very genetically close to them and were their kin, and that perhaps ended the war and began the early attempts at reunification. It's probable the Romulans already knew, but perhaps the Vulcans finding out. They covered up the entire thing so the population and their allies, and more importantly their enemies, wouldn't discover the truth. But that's just my personal theory. We don't know what the war was named, we don't know what they were fighting over, and we don't know what caused it, and ultimately we don't know what ended it. We're not entirely sure how long it lasted for, just that Q started it and who the two main belligerents were. It's entirely equally plausible that it was fought by proxies, not by direct engagement. And again, it's probable the Vulcans never really got a good look at the Romulans, because at this time they seem to hide themselves. But let me know again in the comments below what you think. Like, share and subscribe for more videos about the Star Trek universe. And with that said, we're at the end of the video. Bye bye. I'd just like to say a thank you to everyone for watching that video. I hope you enjoyed it. I really enjoy making these. If you did enjoy it, please consider giving a like, share and a subscribe, and maybe checking out the other videos on the screen right now, and in the description box below there are links to my other social media accounts.